official in Libya's interim government says the burial of former leader Muammar Gaddafi has been delayed for a few days. Oil Minister Ali Sahouni says arrangements for the location of the gravesite are still being made. Crowds in Tripoli celebrated through the night following the news of Gaddafi's death at the hands of opposition fighters in his hometown of Sirte.
Surprise really that Gaddafi ended in this way. The fact that he had to be dragged out of a storm drain before he was killed, I don't think is going to help, shall we say, a Gaddafi myth for the future.
An official in Libya's interim government says the burial of former leader Muammar Gaddafi has been delayed for a few days. Oil Minister Ali Sahouni says arrangements for the location of the gravesite are still being made. Crowds in Tripoli celebrated through the night following the news of Gaddafi's death at the hands of opposition fighters in his hometown of Sirte. Tony Bertley has this report on Gaddafi's final moments.
District number 2 in the centre of Sirte, where Gaddafi's fighters made their last stand. Even though they were up against superior numbers and firepower, they put up a tough fight. We're at the western edge of the front line in Sirte, and there's some considerable force here of fighters, but they've stalled here. They haven't moved any further forward. In some areas around here, they've in fact moved backwards. So the resistance is still strong from the pro-Gaddafi forces. They show no signs of giving up just yet. But it wasn't to last. On Thursday morning, Gaddafi loyalists tried to break through the lines and escape. The burnt-out cars, evidence of their failure, and then the news that Muammar Gaddafi was one who tried to flee and was captured. It explained why the stubborn resistance. This mobile phone footage shows the moment the former Libyan leader was taken. At this point he was alive, but witnesses say he had been wounded, possibly in the shoulder.
When we captured Gaddafi, we did not hit him. Of course, there was a little hitting. We hit him a little in the beginning. This is the defense minister's watch, and Gaddafi was sitting on this gun, and he had a gold pistol.
Shaken but silent, he was taken in an ambulance to Misrata, flanked by scores of military vehicles. The shouts and cheers of the fighters reflecting their prized prisoner, but yet to divulge his identity for security reasons. But before arriving, he died. These exclusive images were again captured on the mobile phones of fighters. Exactly what happened is not clear, but that was not important to these men who filled the streets of Sirte with celebratory gunfire. Gaddafi's defence minister and head of military intelligence were both said to have been killed Thursday. They sang of victory and a new Libya. There were some pockets of resistance which were soon mopped up. Prisoners were paraded through the streets. It was claimed they were either mercenaries or die-hard loyalists. Some showed signs of physical abuse and were terrified. They were driven off to an unknown location. But among the celebrations, a drive through the rubble gave an idea of the true cost of the battle for Sirte. Hardly a building remained unscathed. Evidence of the intense fighting was everywhere. And the human cost, a body in the street and in the grounds of the small clinic in the heart of the combat zone, the graves of 24 men, probably Gaddafi fighters, buried almost where they died. What started as a peaceful protest in Benghazi 8 months ago has finally ended with the death of the man who called his people rats and cockroaches. But he was right about one thing. He said he would die in Libya.
Debate is bound to continue about exactly how Gaddafi was killed, but the fact is alive no matter whether in captivity. He could still rally support and therefore cause problems, dead he can't, and his death brings a form of closure to this brutal conflict and now allows a new Libya to truly begin. Tony Berkeley, Al Jazeera, Sirte.
James Bays joins us live from Tripoli. James, possibly an unfortunate comment from the Finance Minister, Ali Sahouni, saying they were going to keep Gaddafi's body in the freezer for a few days so everybody knows he's dead. But it seems that that funeral, that burial, has been put on hold.
It looks like the burial has been put on hold. We're getting different information from different officials of the National Transitional Council telling us different things, but saying that the arrangements are still being made, still being decided, various decisions about whether various members of Gaddafi's tribe, members of his family, clearly not his close family because they're either dead or in exile, but whether they would be invited to this burial. Obviously difficult for the National Transitional Council, because the more people that they invite to that burial, the more people who will know the burial place, and they don't want it to become a place that Gaddafi loyalists in the future can gather. As I say, a confusing picture, quite possibly, in my estimation, deliberately confusing, deliberately perhaps a little bit of disinformation. I think it's quite likely the first we're going to know about the burial of Gaddafi is after it has taken place. They really don't want the media knowing every move at this stage.
I guess these comments could be just them trying to put you off the scent. Just moving on to the reaction from the international community, lots of supportive comments, the latest from President Nicolas Sarkozy, who has called for the National Transitional Council to bring reconciliation, forgiveness and unity to the country. Very much that is the message coming from everywhere now, isn't it? That the NTC has to somehow get this country on the right track.
Absolutely, that's the word coming from the international community, and on the ground that's the challenge. You particularly, I think, going to see that challenge in places like Bani Walid and Sirte as people return to those cities, these last two places where Gaddafi loyalists were holding out. I think there will be some question marks about some of the citizens in those places. Were they supporting Gaddafi? What did they know? Because we've heard from some of the citizens in Sirte that they didn't have power, they didn't have electricity, they didn't have cell phones, and they thought that Gaddafi was actually still in power in Tripoli. But there is, I think, the danger of acts of revenge, and I think that is going to be one of the challenges for the National Transitional Council to deal with that. I think also in the coming days, we've heard the comments from international statesmen, but I think we're going to hear comments from international human rights groups. And there still are serious questions about exactly what happened in the final moments of Gaddafi's life, in the final moments of his son Mutassim's life. Some here still saying privately that I think these were executions, and I think there will be some question marks and some serious questions asked by international human rights groups.
I saw you down in Martyrs Square with the celebrations, some of the soldiers walking around with flowers in their weapons. How much of an effort now is there going to be to try and get those weapons off the streets, trying to pull in all the weapons, all the guns that the National Transitional Council fighters have been using to fight this war?
Well, I think everyone is signed up to that being the idea in the long term. When you speak to any of the fighters on the streets, when you speak to their commanders, they all say that eventually we can't have all these armed groups on the streets. We need to have one national army and one national police force. So I think the challenge is how you get to that and what the timeline and the deadline is for that, because I think some of those who have fought their way into this capital city, Tripoli, for example, 2 months ago. For example, the fighters from Misrata, the fighters from the Nafusa Mountains, the people, for example, from Sintan, they'll want to say in the national government, they'll want to make sure that the government is not just run by people, for example, from Benghazi. There'll be all sorts of regional rivalries, there'll be all sorts of political manoeuvring, and I think that will be linked in with handing back the weapons. I think that's going to be a key challenge for the new interim government under a new Prime Minister, because the current Prime Minister, Mahmoud Jibril, has said he's standing down, is to get an exact timeline, a process for handing back those weapons, integrating those forces and creating one security force here, one police and one army.
James, good to talk to you.
At short notice, they're feeling now very happy with what they've done. They believe they've deserved well of the country and so on. We have to hope that they will be able to work together, and that remains to be tested. All I can tell you is that so far they've been saying the right things.
Members of the NTC have said themselves they won't stand in those democratic elections when they happen. Is that a concern? Might that produce some kind of power vacuum, and who might fill it?
No, I don't see it that way at all, as a matter of fact. I think it indicates that they're fed up with a system where winner takes all, and they're determined not to have such a system in the future. I think it shows a commendable balance. Who knows how it will work out in reality, but I'm glad that they are not simply saying the elections are going to be a formality. Of course, everyone knows that we will win, because that is all too common, I'm afraid, in the world.
And from a personal perspective, you know the country very well. Did you ever foresee that this day would come under these circumstances?
No, I didn't. I thought that Gaddafi had got control, and that his control would last until he himself failed, either death or illness or something like that. Nobody, I think, either inside or outside Libya, foresaw that the events in Tunisia and Egypt would have the impact that they did in Libya. It's very strange looking back on it. It seems obvious that we have a contagion, we have a revolution in Tunisia, followed by one in Egypt, followed by one in Libya. But I can tell you, until the day before it started in Libya, nobody expected it.
Well then, Miles, we're grateful for your time. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you.